Good evening, everyone. Let me start with a simple but powerful idea. If you want to become more disciplined, if you want to wire your brain to do hard things consistently, there's one habit that stands above the rest. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it is effective, scientifically effective, at reshaping your brain for discipline. That habit is daily cold exposure, as simple as a cold shower, an ice bath, or even a plunge into cold water for just 1 to 3 minutes. Now I know what some of you are thinking, cold showers really, but stay with me. The neuroscience behind this is compelling. I want to walk you through 6 mechanisms, 6 real, biological changes that cold exposure creates in your brain and body, changes that drive discipline from the inside out. There's a specific habit that, when done consistently, begins to change not just how you feel but how your brain functions. It's deceptively simple and widely available. It's the act of exposing your body to cold deliberately, regularly, and for short periods of time. This could be as accessible as a 2-minute cold shower at home, or as intense as an ice bath or plunge into cold water. What matters most is that the cold is uncomfortable. It needs to activate a stress response in the body. And that's exactly why it works. When you voluntarily enter cold water, especially in the morning, you're doing something powerful. You're taking action before your brain is ready, before it feels convenient or comfortable. That moment when you override the inner resistance is the exact neural moment that starts to build discipline. You're making a decision that prioritizes long-term strength over short-term comfort. And your brain takes note of that. The cold immediately triggers the release of key neurochemicals, particularly norepinephrine, which enhances alertness, focus, and attention, and it happens quickly, within seconds. These changes shift your mental state rapidly from sluggish or reactive into clear and action-oriented. But that's just the start. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward, also increases significantly. Not in a way that spikes and crashes like sugar or social media, but in a slow, sustained arc that elevates your drive for hours afterward. What this means is simple. Cold exposure doesn't just wake you up. It chemically places your brain into a state of increased motivation, higher focus, and greater willingness to engage with challenge. You're not waiting to feel disciplined, you're creating the conditions in your brain for discipline to emerge. And the beauty of this is its simplicity. No gear, no complicated planning, just a choice daily to lean into a controlled stressor that trains your nervous system and signals to your brain, we face what's hard. That choice, repeated over time, starts the rewiring process. You're no longer just someone trying to be disciplined, you're becoming someone who chooses discomfort on purpose. That's the real transformation, and it begins the moment you step into the cold. What makes cold exposure so powerful isn't just the psychological challenge, it's the neurochemical response it triggers. When your skin comes into contact with cold water, your body isn't just reacting physically. Your brain is launching a full-scale biochemical shift that changes your internal environment in a way that directly supports focus, energy, and discipline. Within moments, the drop in skin temperature stimulates the release of norepinephrine, a chemical that sharpens attention, increases vigilance, and elevates mood. This isn't subtle. Studies show that cold exposure can boost norepinephrine levels by up to 200 to 300%. That's a dramatic shift. This neurotransmitter is essential when it comes to preparing the body for action. It's what puts you in a mentally alert, hyper-forming state. But there's another key player here, dopamine. Cold exposure causes a delayed but sustained rise in dopamine levels, often up to 2.5 times baseline, and that increase can last for hours. Dopamine is what gives you that deep sense of drive, the motivation to pursue, persist, and achieve. It is the molecule most closely tied to goal-directed behavior, and what's remarkable about cold exposure is that it triggers this rise without requiring any external reward. The discomfort is the stimulus, and the reward is neurochemical. This matters because most people wait for motivation to appear before taking action. But with cold exposure, action comes first and the brain chemistry follows. You're not hoping to feel motivated. You're generating the chemical conditions that create motivation. This shift in neurochemistry from passive to active, from avoidance to pursuit, is foundational to discipline. It allows you to override the default setting of comfort, seeking, and instead enter a state where your brain is primed to engage, persist, and execute. Over time, your brain starts to associate stress, the good kind, with reward. That rewires your relationship to effort itself, and that's the real transformation. You're not just becoming someone who tolerates discomfort. You're becoming someone whose brain is wired to seek challenge, because challenge now feels good at a chemical level. This is how cold exposure flips a biological switch, one that creates not just a moment of willpower, but a long-term neurological foundation for sustained discipline. Another reason cold exposure is so uniquely effective is because of what it does to your stress response system. When you step into cold water, your body immediately activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same system responsible for the classic fight or flight response. Your heart rate rises, your breath shortens, and your body prepares to confront a perceived threat. And here's the key: you're triggering that system on purpose. This is a controlled stressor, it's voluntary, and that makes all the difference in how your brain processes the experience. By choosing to enter discomfort and staying there, even for a minute or two, you're teaching your nervous system something critically important. Not all stress is harmful. In fact, some forms of stress, when approached deliberately and with intention, become tools for growth. You're training your body to remain calm and steady within the stress. This is not about avoiding discomfort, it's about adapting to it, staying functional inside it. Over time, this begins to rewire your brain's threshold for what it considers threatening. The cold becomes a kind of daily rehearsal for life's chaos, for hard conversations, long workouts, setbacks, or delayed gratification. Because every time you step into the cold and breathe through the discomfort, you're strengthening the neural circuits involved in resilience, composure, and action under pressure. This kind of nervous system training builds what psychologists call stress inoculation. Your brain no longer reacts to challenge with the same intensity or urgency. You stop flinching at resistance. You stop hesitating. The part of your brain that once screamed retreat gets quieter, and the part that says stay the course gets louder. This is a major shift because so much of discipline depends on how we handle stress. Most people try to avoid stress, and so they build habits of escape. But with cold exposure, you're doing the opposite. You're facing it directly, and you're proving to your brain and your body that you can function clearly in the midst of intensity. That proof accumulates, and the nervous system learns, over time, what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, what once caused hesitation becomes an invitation, and that shift from avoidance to engagement is one of the clearest markers of a disciplined mind. There's also a deeper cognitive shift that happens over time with regular cold exposure, one that directly involves the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function. This is where your capacity for focus, planning, decision making, and most importantly, impulse control resides. It's the control center of discipline. Each time you choose to step into cold water, and more importantly, each time you stay in that cold water, you're engaging this region of the brain. You're overriding the limbic system, the primal part of your brain that screams for comfort, safety, and retreat. You're saying, I know this is uncomfortable, but I'm doing it anyway. That moment of override is a neurological rep, and like any muscle, the more you activate it, the stronger it gets. When repeated daily, this practice enhances the functional connectivity between your prefrontal cortex and the rest of your brain, especially the circuits that regulate emotion and behavior. That's not theory, it's measurable. Functional MRI scans show that individuals who engage regularly in deliberate cold exposure or other forms of voluntary stress tend to show greater prefrontal activation during difficult tasks. That means they can hold focus longer, delay gratification more effectively, and act in alignment with goals rather than moods, and this matters in the real world. Because most failures of discipline don't come from a lack of knowledge, they come from a failure to override short-term impulses. Skipping the workout, reaching for the phone, delaying the hard conversation. In each of those moments, the question isn't, what's the right thing to do? It's, can I get my brain to do it? Cold exposure trains exactly that. It strengthens the neural circuitry that allows you to act in the presence of resistance. It teaches your brain not just how to tolerate discomfort, but how to choose the harder path over and over with clarity and control. So, while it may seem like a physical practice, cold exposure is actually cognitive training. It's a daily sharpening of the part of your brain that says, I'm in charge. That's not willpower, that's neural architecture. And once that architecture is built, discipline stops feeling like a fight. It becomes your default operating mode. Something remarkable happens when you consistently choose to begin your day with discomfort, especially a discomfort you could easily avoid. When you make cold exposure a daily habit, you're not just influencing your neurochemistry or stress response. You're reshaping your behavioral identity, the way you see yourself, and the kinds of choices you default to throughout the day. Every time you step into cold water, especially in the morning, you send a clear and undeniable signal to your brain, I do hard things. That's not a motivational quote, that's a neurological statement, and the brain listens to it. In that moment, you're aligning your actions with a higher version of yourself, one that values growth over comfort, one that moves toward friction rather than away from it. This small act, just a few minutes of discomfort, sets the tone for your entire day. It creates what psychologists call behavioral momentum. You start your day with a win, a real win, one that took effort, one that required override, and that win creates a ripple effect. Your brain begins to expect follow-through. It starts to anticipate more action, more forward movement, more integrity with your goals. Why? Because the human brain craves consistency between identity and behavior. When your morning begins with a decision that reinforces a disciplined identity, your subsequent choices are more likely to align with that identity. You're more likely to show up to the workout, more likely to say no to the distraction, more likely to stay focused on the task you committed to. What's important here is that none of this is about willpower in the traditional sense. It's about shifting the baseline. You're no longer trying to become a disciplined person. You're practicing the behaviors of a disciplined person every single morning, and those behaviors reshape your internal model of self. In neuroscience, this is known as top-down feedback, when repeated behavior begins to reprogram identity, and identity then guides behavior automatically. Over time, this feedback loop becomes self-reinforcing. Discipline is no longer something you strive for. It becomes the natural extension of who you are because your nervous system, your chemistry, and your habits have all been conditioned to support it. And it all begins with a decision most people would avoid, to turn the water cold and step in anyway. One of the most overlooked aspects of building discipline, and one of the most powerful, is repetition. It's not the intensity of a single act that rewires the brain. It's the frequency with which that act is performed. Cold exposure is effective not just because it's difficult or invigorating, but because it can be done consistently. Every day, no excuses, no equipment, just a deliberate choice to face discomfort. This matters because the human brain is governed by the principle of neuroplasticity, the ability to change itself in response to experience. But plasticity doesn't happen automatically. It happens when certain conditions are met, chief among them, repetition under heightened emotional or physiological arousal. Cold exposure creates that exact condition. When you step into cold water, your arousal level spikes, heart rate increases, breath shortens, cortisol and norepinephrine rise. In that heightened state, the brain is far more receptive to forming new connections. And if you pair that state with a repeated behavior like staying calm, maintaining breath control, or overriding the desire to escape, you're literally teaching your brain, this is how we respond under stress. Do that once, and you feel good for a few hours. Do it daily, and you start creating structural changes in the brain. You strengthen the neural pathways responsible for self-regulation, stress tolerance, and executive control. And you weaken the circuits that govern avoidance, impulsivity, and emotional reactivity. This is Hebbian learning in action, neurons that fire together, wire together. Each cold exposure session becomes a training ground not for the body, but for the circuitry of discipline. And because it's brief and repeatable, it fits into daily life without requiring heroic effort. You don't need 90 minutes of meditation or a perfect gym routine. You need 2 to 3 minutes of deliberate discomfort, repeated without fail. That's where real change comes from, not from doing something difficult once, but from showing your brain, day after day, that you follow through. That discomfort isn't a signal to retreat, it's a cue to engage. That this is what we do now. Eventually, discipline stops being a decision. It becomes a default. The circuits have been built. The rewiring has taken place. And your brain is no longer trying to become something new, it's simply expressing what you've trained it to be. So here's the truth. Discipline isn't something you're born with. It's not reserved for the few. It's a trainable capacity, one that's built through daily choices, consistent exposure to challenge, and deliberate interaction with your nervous system. And there's no more direct, accessible, and neurologically potent way to build it than through cold exposure. Because when you voluntarily enter the cold, you're not just building toughness. You're not chasing a dopamine high. You're telling your brain every single day, we don't run from resistance, we move into it. You're training your neurochemistry to work for you. You're conditioning your stress response to remain stable under pressure. You're strengthening the very circuits in your brain responsible for focus, override, and follow through. And you're shaping an identity not built on words or intentions, but on repeated action, the kind of action that rewires you at the deepest level. This is where unstoppable discipline begins, not with motivation, not with hacks, but with a decision, a few minutes of discomfort repeated with precision, until it changes how your brain perceives challenge, how your body handles stress, and how your mind chooses action over excuse. The habit is simple, the science is solid, and the outcome is transformative. Step in,